Imagine a world on the cusp of a new era, a time of incredible invention and boundless ambition. The early 20th century was a whirlwind of progress, and out of this whirlwind sailed a ship so grand, so magnificent. It was called the Ship of Dreams. This is the story of the RMS Titanic, a vessel that was more than just steel and rivets. It was a symbol of an age, a floating palace that promised a new standard of luxury and safety. But it was also a story of human pride, a tale of how the belief in our own invincibility can lead to the most devastating consequences. Join me as we journey back in time to the shipyards of Belfast, where this colossal dream was born. We'll explore the groundbreaking design that made the Titanic the largest moving object ever built by human hands. We'll walk its opulent decks, marvel at its grand staircase, and peek into the lavish first-class suites that housed some of the wealthiest people on the planet. But we'll also descend into the heart of the ship, to the humble third-class cabins filled with hopeful immigrants, each carrying their own dreams of a new life in America. The story of the Titanic is not just about a ship. It's about the people whose lives converged on that fateful voyage. We'll meet the titans of industry, like John Jacob Astor, IV, one of the richest men in the world, returning from his honeymoon. We'll get to know the unsinkable Molly Brown, an American socialite whose flamboyant personality and incredible courage would become legendary. And we'll hear the stories of countless others, from the dedicated crew working tirelessly below deck to the families in steerage, betting everything they had on a brighter future across the Atlantic. Their hopes, their dreams, and their destinies were all intertwined aboard this one incredible vessel. So, how did this marvel of engineering, this icon of an optimistic era, become synonymous with disaster? The Titanic wasn't just celebrated for its luxury. It was hailed as unsinkable. This wasn't just a catchy marketing phrase. It was a belief rooted in its revolutionary design. The ship was constructed with a double-bottomed hull and divided into 16 watertight compartments. The thinking was that even if 4 of these compartments were breached, the ship would remain afloat. It seemed foolproof, a triumph of human ingenuity over the raw power of nature. This belief in the Titanic's invincibility bred a sense of complacency, a dangerous arrogance that permeated from the drawing board to the bridge. The ship was equipped with only enough lifeboats for about half of its 2,200 passengers and crew, not because of a shortage, but because the regulations of the time were hopelessly outdated. The lifeboats were seen more as a way to ferry passengers to a rescue ship, not as a means of total evacuation. After all, who would need to evacuate an unsinkable ship? This mindset, this fatal pride, set the stage for a tragedy of unimaginable proportions. The very features designed to make it safe created a false sense of security that would prove deadly. As the Titanic set sail from Southampton on April 10, 1912, the atmosphere was electric. Crowds gathered to witness the departure of this floating city. On board, life settled into a rhythm of opulence and routine. First-class passengers dined in extravagant restaurants, strolled along the promenade deck, and relaxed in the Turkish baths. In second class, teachers, engineers, and clergy enjoyed comforts that rivaled first class on other liners. And in third class, the vibrant energy of many cultures mixed, with music and dancing filling the common areas as families from Ireland, Scandinavia, and across Europe embarked on the biggest journey of their lives. For 4 days, the voyage was the weather was clear, the sea was calm, and the magnificent ship sliced through the Atlantic with impressive speed. But the ocean held a hidden danger. Wireless operators on the Titanic and other nearby ships began receiving warnings of icebergs in their path. These messages, crucial pieces of a deadly puzzle, were passed along, but they didn't create the sense of urgency you might expect. Captain Edward Smith, a veteran captain on his prestigious final voyage before retirement, maintained a high speed. The race to set a transatlantic record, while not official policy, was an unspoken pressure. The need to arrive in New York on schedule, to prove the ship's prowess, seemed to overshadow the growing threat lurking in the cold, dark waters ahead. Then came the night of April 14th. The sea was unnaturally calm, like a sheet of black glass, making it incredibly difficult for the lookouts in the crow's nest to spot icebergs, which are normally detected by the surf breaking at their base. To make matters worse, the ship's Lookouts were not equipped with binoculars. The key to the locker where they were stored had been accidentally taken ashore by an officer who was transferred off the ship just before it sailed. It was a small mistake, a simple oversight, but one that would have monumental consequences. Just before midnight, a lookout frantically rang the warning bell 3 times and telephoned the bridge, shouting the chilling words, "Iceberg, right ahead." First Officer William Murdoch immediately ordered the engines to be reversed and the ship to be turned hard to starboard. But it was too late. The immense momentum of the 46,000-ton vessel made it impossible to steer clear in time. For a few agonizing seconds, it seemed like they might just miss it. But then, a sickening grinding sound echoed from deep within the hull as the iceberg scraped along the ship's side, punching holes below the waterline. On deck, the impact was surprisingly subtle. For many passengers, it felt like a slight shudder, nothing more. Some who were awake barely noticed. But below, the damage was catastrophic. Water began pouring into the forward compartments. The ship's designer, Thomas Andrus, was on board for the maiden voyage. After a quick inspection of the damage with Captain Smith, he delivered the grim verdict. The iceberg had breached 5 of the watertight compartments, one more than the ship could withstand. His calculation was chillingly precise. The great Titanic, the unsinkable ship, would founder. He estimated it had, at most, 2 hours before it would sink beneath the waves. Chaos did not erupt immediately. It was a slow, creeping realization. The crew began preparing the lifeboats, but confusion and a lack of training created deadly delays. They were there for women and children first was followed. But on one side of the ship, officers interpreted it as women and children only, sending lifeboats away that were less than half full. In the unfolding panic, social class dictated survival. First-class passengers, located on the upper decks near the lifeboats, had a far greater chance of escape than the third-class passengers, who had to navigate a labyrinth of corridors and locked gates to even reach the boat deck. As the ship's bow sank lower and lower into the icy water, the true horror of the situation became clear. The band, famously, played on their calm, cheerful music, a surreal counterpoint to the rising panic. This act of bravery was meant to soothe the passengers, a final, selfless gesture in the face of certain doom. Stories of heroism and sacrifice emerged from the darkness. Men saw their wives and children into lifeboats, knowing they would never see them again. Crew members stayed at their posts, keeping the lights on as long as possible to aid the evacuation. By 2:20 a.m. on April 15th, the Titanic's stern rose high into the air. Silhouetted against the star-filled sky, the lights flickered one last time and then went out, plunging the ship into total darkness. Then, with a deafening roar of groaning metal and crashing machinery, the magnificent vessel broke in two and slipped beneath the surface of the Atlantic. Over 1,500 people were plunged into the freezing water. Their cries for help echoed across the dark ocean, a sound that would haunt the survivors in the lifeboats for the rest of their lives. The water temperature was just below freezing. Survival was a matter of minutes. The rescue ship, the Carpathia, had raced through the ice field at full speed after receiving the Titanic's distress call, but it arrived 2 hours after the ship had sunk. Its crew could only pull the 705 survivors from the lifeboats. They were met with a scene of absolute devastation. A sea of bodies and wreckage, where the grandest ship in the world had been just hours before. The ship of dreams had become a tomb. In the aftermath, the world was stunned. How could this have happened? Inquiries in both the United States and Britain sought to answer that question. The hearings revealed a cascade of failures: the ignored ice warnings, the excessive speed, the insufficient lifeboats, the lack of crew training, and the fatal arrogance that underpinned the entire project. The disaster led to sweeping changes in maritime safety. The International Ice Patrol was established to monitor icebergs in the North Atlantic, and new regulations mandated that all ships carry enough lifeboats for every single person on board, and that lifeboat drills be regularly conducted. The story of the Titanic is a powerful and timeless lesson. It's a story about the limits of technology and the dangers of human pride. It reminds us that no matter how advanced we become, we are still subject to the forces of nature. But it's also a story of human courage, sacrifice, and the enduring power of the human spirit in the face of unimaginable tragedy. The dreams of those who sailed on the Titanic may have sunk to the bottom of the ocean, but their stories live on, a solemn reminder of a night when the unsinkable sank, and the world was changed forever. It was the night of April 14th, 1912. The RMS Titanic, the largest ship afloat, sliced through the North Atlantic on her maiden voyage. On board, over 2,000 souls reveled in her luxury, utterly oblivious to the fate lurking in the icy darkness ahead. The night was deceptively beautiful, a moonless sky, spangled with countless stars, reflected on a sea as flat and calm as a sheet of glass. This deadly calm was a curse, not a blessing. Without waves breaking against its base, an iceberg would be nearly invisible until it was terrifyingly close. 4 hours. Warnings had been crackling through the ship's wireless telegraph system. The Mesaba, the Baltic, the Californian all sent messages about massive ice fields directly in Titanic's path. But these crucial warnings never reached the bridge. Why? The ship's two wireless operators, Jack Phillips and Harold Bry, were overwhelmed. They worked for the Marconi Company, not the White Star Line, and their primary job was sending and receiving personal telegrams for the wealthy first-class passengers. A backlog of messages meant commercial traffic took priority over ice warnings. One frustrated operator on a nearby ship, the Californian, even had his warning cut off with a brusque, "Shut up. I am busy." This single moment would haunt history. On the bridge, the officers were confident in their vessel. The ship was an unsinkable marvel of engineering. They maintained a speed of over 22 knots, nearly her maximum, pushing through the known iced region. In the crow's nest, high above the deck, lookouts Frederick Fleet and Reginald Lee peered into the blackness. They had no binoculars. The keys to the locker where they were stored had been left behind in Southampton by an officer reassigned at the last minute. They were relying solely on their eyes, straining to spot a threat in the inky void. At 11:40 p.m., Fleet saw it. A dark mass, darker than the water, dead ahead. It grew larger, impossibly fast. He rang the warning bell 3 times, the signal for an object straight ahead, and telephoned the bridge. "Iceberg right ahead," he shouted. The response from 6th Officer Moody was a calm, "Thank you." On the bridge, 1st Officer Murdoch, in command, immediately ordered hurry stop and telegraphed the engine room for full astern. It was the correct maneuver, designed to swing the ship's bow away from the danger. But Titanic was a behemoth. She was too big, moving too fast. Her turning circle was immense. For 37 agonizing seconds, the ship seemed to hang in space, slowly, agonizingly, beginning to turn. It wasn't enough. The iceberg didn't hit head-on, which might have saved the ship. Instead, it scraped along the starboard side. Passengers on deck felt a slight shudder, a gentle vibration that barely interrupted their conversations. Some thought the ship had dropped a propeller blade. Below the waterline, it was a different story. The immense pressure of the iceberg popped rivets and buckled the steel plates of the hull like a can opener, creating a series of gashes that stretched for nearly 300 feet. Water began pouring into the first 6 of her 16 watertight compartments. The ship's designer, Thomas Andrews, knew the fatal truth immediately. Titanic was designed to stay afloat with her first 4 compartments flooded, but not 6. He gave her an hour, maybe 2. The unsinkable ship was doomed. Panic was slow to set in. The band played on. Officers tried to maintain order, initially telling passengers there was no danger. But the ship's increasing list, the cold air on deck, and the roar of steam being vented from the funnels told a different story. The command was given women and children first. But there was a catastrophic problem. There were only enough lifeboats for about half the people on board, a fatal flaw in maritime regulations, which based lifeboat capacity on a ship's tonnage, not its passenger count. Chaos ensued on the boat deck. Some lifeboats were launched half-empty in the confusion. Husbands said goodbye to wives, fathers to children, knowing they would never see them again. As the boat dipped lower and the stern rose high into the air, the true horror of the situation became clear. The lights flickered and then went out, plunging the final moments into total darkness. The immense strain on the hull became too much. With a sound like thunder, the Titanic broke in, two between the third and fourth funnels. The stern section settled back for a moment before rising vertically, a black silhouette against the starry sky. It hung there for a few minutes, a final, horrifying monument, before beginning its final 2-mile plunge to the ocean floor. At 2:20 a.m. on April 5th, 10th, the great ship was gone. In the water, over 1,500 people fought for their lives in the freezing -2°C water. Their cries for help filled the night, but for most, survival was impossible. Hypothermia would claim them in minutes. From the scattered lifeboats, survivors could only listen, helplessly, as the cries faded into an eerie silence. The night the Titanic hit fate was a cascade of human error, arrogance, and cruel twists of chance. A story that reminds us that even the greatest marvels of our creation are at the mercy of nature and our own. When the Titanic sank, it wasn't just a ship that was lost. It was a microcosm of society that plunged into the icy Atlantic. More than a century later, we're still captivated, not just by the disaster itself, but by the incredible human stories that unfolded in its final hours. Stories of heroes, cowards, and the chilling reality of survival. Let's separate the facts from the Hollywood fiction. We've all heard the phrase, women and children first. On that fateful night, it was more than a saying, it was a life or death command. The evidence is stark. Over 97% of first-class women survived, but only 33% of men in third class did. This wasn't just about chivalry. It was a brutal reflection of the era's rigid class structure. Access to the lifeboats, to information, to a chance at survival, was dictated by the ticket you held. While some wealthy men allegedly used their status to secure a spot on a lifeboat, others chose a different path. Think of Benjamin Guggenheim, one of the richest men on board. He and his valet famously changed into their finest evening wear, stating, "We've dressed up in our best and are prepared to go down like gentlemen." They were last seen on deck, sipping brandy and smoking cigars as the ship went under. It's a story of incredible calm in the face of certain death. Then there was Isidore and Ida Strauss, the co-owners of Macy's department store. Ida was offered a seat on a lifeboat, but she refused to leave her husband. She reportedly said, "We have lived together for many years. Where you go, I go." Eyewitnesses saw them sitting on deck chairs, holding hands, as the waves washed over them. Theirs is one of the most powerful love stories from the disaster, a testament to a bond not even death could break. And we can't forget the crew. Captain Edward Smith famously went down with his ship, a tradition of the sea he upheld to the very end. His final orders were "Be Brit," a call for courage and order amidst chaos. The ship's band, led by Wallace Hartley, played on as the deck tilted, their music a final, haunting act of defiance against the inevitable. Their melodies provided a strange sense of calm, an anchor of civility as the world fell apart. They played until the very end, sacrificing their own chances of survival to soothe the terrified passengers. But the story of survival isn't always so clear-cut. Take J. Bruce Ismay, the chairman of the White Star Line. He survived, stepping into one of the last lifeboats. For the rest of his life, he was branded a coward. The press vilified him. Cartoons depicted him, pushing women and children aside. But was it that simple? He claimed he only took a spot when there were no more women or children in sight. We'll never know the full truth, but his story shows how survival itself could come with a life sentence of guilt and public shame. Another fascinating case is that of Masabumi Hosono, the only Japanese passenger on board. He also survived, but when he returned to Japan, he was met with scorn. He was fired from his job and publicly condemned for not dying with the other passengers. In the Samurai Code of Honor, his survival was seen as a disgrace. It is a stark reminder that the definition of heroism and cowardice is deeply tied to culture and time. What one society sees as a pragmatic choice, another sees as a deep moral failing. Then there are the eerie coincidences and premonitions that add another layer of mystery to the Titanic saga. 14 years before the Titanic sank, a novelist named Morgan Robertson wrote a book called Futility, or The Wreck of the Titan. It told the story of a massive, unsinkable ocean liner named the Titan that strikes an iceberg in the North Atlantic on a cold April night. The fictional ship, just like the real one, didn't have enough lifeboats for everyone. The parallels are so uncanny they send a shiver down your spine. There were also personal premonitions. A second-class passenger, Eva Hart, was 7 years old at the time. Her mother had a terrible feeling about the voyage from the start. She was so convinced something bad would happen that she slept every night in her clothes and refused to sleep during the day. Her premonition saved them. When the iceberg hit, she was awake and ready, and managed to get herself and Eva into a lifeboat. The stories of those who didn't sail are just as chilling. Alfred Gwyn Vanderbilt, a Milione, cancelled his trip at the last minute. So late that some newspapers initially listed him among the victims. His luggage, however, went down with the ship. He narrowly escaped the Titanic, only to die 3 years later when a German U-boat torpedoed the Lusitania. It's a strange twist of fate that feels like something out of a movie. Speaking of movies, Hollywood has certainly shaped our memory of the Titanic. The 1997 film by James Cameron is a masterpiece. But it's important to remember that Jack and Rose are fictional characters. Their love story was a brilliant way to frame the historical event. But the real stories are just as compelling, if not more so. The film did get many things right, though, like the band playing on the class divide and the sheer terror of the ship's final moments, one of the most powerful and often overlooked aspects of the disaster is the psychology of survival in the water. After the ship sank, hundreds of people were left freezing in the -2°C water. The sound was described by survivors in the lifeboats as a collective moan, a horrifying symphony of cries for help that slowly faded as hypothermia took its toll. Only one lifeboat went back to look for survivors. Fifth Officer Harold Lowe emptied one boat and gathered a small crew to row back into the field of boaties. They pulled 4 people from the water, but one died shortly after. It was a harrowing task, navigating a sea of the dead to find the few who were still alive. His courage is a stark contrast to the fear that kept the other lifeboats away. Their occupants worried they would be swamped by desperate people. The aftermath of the sinking was a media frenzy. The world was desperate for heroes and villains, for simple narratives to make sense of an incomprehensible tragedy. The unsinkable Margaret Brown, became a legend for her efforts to get her lifeboat to go back for survivors. The crew members who died became martyrs, and figures like J. Bruce's May became the scapegoats. The story of the Titanic is more than just a historical event. It's a timeless human drama that forces us to ask ourselves difficult questions. What would we have done? Would we have been a hero, sacrificing ourselves for others? Would we have prioritized our own survival? The truth is, we can't know. The Titanic shows us that in the face of disaster, people are capable of both incredible bravery and heartbreaking self-preservation. These stories, both the famous and the forgotten, are the true legacy of the Ship of Dreams. They remind us of the fragility of life and the enduring power of the human spirit. Why did the Titanic, the unsinkable ship, sink? For over a century, we thought we knew the story. A giant iceberg, a tragic accident. But what if that's not the whole truth? The story we've been told might just be the tip of the iceberg. Today, we're diving deep into the wreckage, sifting through lost evidence, and exploring the controversial theories that rewrite the final hours of the legendary liner. Get ready, because what we've discovered in the dark depths of the Atlantic will change everything you thought you knew about the world's most famous shipwreck. For decades, the official inquiry concluded the Titanic sank simply because it hit an iceberg. Case closed, but that explanation always felt too simple. How could a ship built with such might, heralded as a marvel of modern engineering, be brought down by a single blow? The questions lingered unanswered until a groundbreaking discovery in 1985, when Dr. Robert Ballard and his team finally located the wreck. 2.5 miles beneath the ocean's surface, the Titanic began to speak again. The ship wasn't in one piece as expected. It was split in two, a shocking revelation that the official inquiries had completely missed. This single discovery blew the case wide open and kick-started a new era of investigation. One of the first big clues came from the steel itself. When scientists recovered pieces of the hull, they made a startling discovery. The steel used to build the Titanic was strong for its time, but it had a fatal flaw. At the icy temperatures of the North Atlantic, it became incredibly brittle. Instead of bending or denting upon impact with the iceberg, It likely shattered like glass. Modern steel would have absorbed much of the impact, possibly buying the ship precious time. So, it wasn't just the iceberg, but the very material of the ship that played a critical role. The Titanic was strong, but it was also fragile in a way its builders could never have imagined. But the brittle steel theory is just one piece of the puzzle. Let's talk about another critical element: the rivets. The Titanic was held together by over 3 million of them. Recent analyses of rivets recovered from the wreck site showed that many used in the bow and stern were made of lower quality iron. Why? The shipyard was under immense pressure to build 3 massive ships at once, leading to a shortage of the best materials and most skilled workers. Cheaper, weaker rivets were used in less critical areas. But here is the catch. The part of the ship that hid the iceberg was held together by these very rivets. When the impact came, they likely popped open, allowing water to flood in much faster than anyone anticipated. It was a classic case of a chain being only as strong as its weakest link. Then there's the ship's design. The Titanic was famous for its watertight compartments, which were supposed to keep it afloat even if several were breached. The ship could stay afloat with its first 4 compartments flooded. The iceberg, however, damaged at least 5, maybe even 6. But here, that's the design flaw. The walls separating these compartments didn't go all the way up. They only reached E-deck. Think of it like an ice cube tray. If you pour water into one section, it eventually overflows into the next. That's exactly what happened on the Titanic. As one compartment filled, water spilled over the top into the next, and then the next, in a deadly domino effect that sealed the ship's fate. The unsinkable design had a catastrophic vulnerability. Perhaps one of the most compelling and controversial theories is the fire in the coal bunker. This isn't a new idea. It was even mentioned in the original inquiries, but largely dismissed. Researcher Sinan Maloney has presented compelling evidence that a fire was raging in one of the ship's massive coal bunkers for days, even before it left port. Photographic evidence taken before the voyage seems to show a dark mark on the hull, right where the iceberg would later strike. The theory goes that this fire, burning at over 1,000 degrees Celsius, seriously weakened the steel in that specific area. So when the iceberg hit, the hull wasn't just brittle from the cold. It was already compromised by a raging inferno. It was a perfect storm of vulnerabilities, a combination of fire and ice. What about the people who were there? The survivor testimonies are a labyrinth of contradictions. For years, the official story was that the ship sank in one piece. This was largely based on the testimony of the most senior surviving officer, Charles Latoller, who insisted it went down intact. But many other survivors, particularly those in steerage, told a different story. They clearly described hearing loud, explosive noises and seeing the ship break in half before it disappeared beneath the waves. Why were their accounts ignored? It's believed the inquiry wanted to project an image of stability. Acknowledging the ship broke apart would have been an admission of catastrophic structural failure, something the White Star Line desperately wanted to avoid. The discovery of the wreck in 2 pieces finally vindicated those forgotten voices. And then there's the lingering mystery of the nearby ships. It's a haunting fact that the Titanic wasn't alone in the dark. The SS Californian was stopped in the ice field, only about 10 to 20 miles away. Its crew saw the Titanic's distressed rockets, but failed to understand their meaning. The captain had retired for the night, and the ship's radio operator had already turned off his equipment just minutes before the Titanic's first distress call. They were close enough to have saved hundreds of lives, but they remained stationary until morning. Was it incompetence, miscommunication? The captain of the Californian was condemned by the inquiries, but the what-ifs of that night are agonizing. What if their radio had been on? What if they had acted on the rocket signals? It's one of the most tragic elements of the entire story. So, why, after all this time, are we still so captivated by the Titanic? It's more than just a shipwreck. It's a story about hubris, the belief that we can conquer nature. It's a snapshot of a bygone era, with its rigid class structure starkly on display as the ship went down. The stories of heroism, of sacrifice, of the band playing on as the decks tilted into the sea they've become modern legends. The discovery of the wreck didn't close the book on the Titanic. It opened a new chapter. The silent, decaying ruins on the seabed are a powerful memorial, a tangible link to the 1,500 souls who were lost. It reminds us that even the greatest technological achievements are vulnerable. The Titanic didn't sink because of one single reason. It was a cascade of failures. It was brittle steel and weak rivets. It was a flawed design and a smoldering fire. It was human error, ignored warnings, and a tragic series of unfortunate events. The iceberg wasn't the cause. It was the catalyst. It was the final, fatal blow to a ship that was already more vulnerable than anyone knew. The full story is darker, more complex, and far more fascinating than the simple tale we were told. The Titanic isn't just a shipwreck. It's a lesson, a mystery, and a human drama that continues to unfold even a century later. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive into the Titanic mystery.